Well, in the past, we talked about a mixture of missing persons cases, but primarily also attacks by what were described as dogs or unknown animal attacks. And tonight I'd like to talk about what's focused on a combination of missing hunters who were never found and missing hunters who were found under mysterious circumstances, particularly bow hunters. I'd like to stress that this is all preliminary from my research and that I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg. In terms of this, what I would urge anyone to do would be to simply go to their favorite search engine and type in a term such as missing bow hunters and the name of their state. And I think they're going to be surprised at the number of results that are going to come up.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing you just normally don't think about. I'll bet it would be surprising to see what turns up by doing that.
I think people will be surprised at both the number of cases as well as the fact that this is happening all over the United States. And tonight, if I can just give a snippet of just a few of the cases that I found, I think that there's some patterns that begin to emerge, as well as some things to make note of when these cases do happen.
Well, I can't think of anyone better to have on talking about this, so let's dive right into it. The first case I'd like for you to talk about involved Corey Fred in Oregon.
Yes, this happened in October of 2014, so it's a relatively recent case. Corey was 37 years old. He was an experienced hunter. He knew the area he was going to be visiting. He sent out a text message at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning to his friends saying, hey, going hunting. The hunting location being his property, a hunting lease that was next to a large area of state forest land. For whatever reason, because his family did not hear from him by that afternoon, the search started relatively quickly on this one. And one of the things that I found unusual in this case was that it started on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, he was reported missing. By late Monday afternoon, we already had military helicopters in the air, and we had what was described in the papers as a mounted posse involved in the search. So it seemed to me that this was all organized very quickly, and that struck me as being an oddity in this case, that there was no delay, there was no authorities telling his family, oh, well, give him 24 hours to come back. It's almost as though someone knew because of the location he was in to send the units out in force and quickly, or perhaps in the case of the military helicopter units, may have already had him in the area for whatever reason. It was noted, and this will be important with some of these cases we get into, that heavy fog covered the area that night, but nonetheless, he was found that night. He was found dead, and what's interesting is that no cause of death was ever released to the public. They never said he had a heart attack. They never said he fell. They never said it was foul play. They just said, oh, we found him. There'll be an autopsy, and then nothing. So this was one of the first cases as I began my own search that struck me as having sufficient oddities that I wanted to remark upon. We had the military involvement. We had rapid response by a large number of authorities, above and beyond the normal search and rescue operation. And we had military involvement even though the guy had only been reported missing for literally hours. So it seemed that there were strange events in this case that set it apart from other cases where a hunter may simply get lost in the woods or may lose their map or may get lost.
That is really strange how the responders were so hush-hush on what they found when they found his body.
And usually it takes a while to organize a military operation, particularly one with aviation assets. So it struck me as very strange that they could have helicopters in the air and searching that quickly within a matter of literally hours. It's almost as though they were on call or already in the area or already engaged in a search in that state forest for someone or something else.
It does make you wonder if they knew something. Let's talk about the next case, Christopher. Charles Emerson.
Charles Emerson was in Rochester, Vermont, and he's part of a different subset of hunters. What we'll find is that you'll read reports of usually older hunters, but who are quite experienced, who will go hunting in the woods and simply vanish and be found later, and no cause of death will ever be released. And that's what happened in this case. Charles was 86 years old. He'd been hunting for probably 70 years. He went hunting alone one day, as he had many years in the past, and he simply vanished. Later that day, when he didn't show up at home, his family called the authorities and a search was instituted. Unlike in many cases where canines are not able to find tracks or find a body, in this case, canine did find the body. But at that point, it becomes a little strange again, because once again, we have no cause of death ever being released to the public. No one said in his obituary, no one said, oh, he died of a heart attack, or he fell down, or he had a stroke. It was just, man vanishes, man's often elderly, and we talked before about my theory that those who are seen as weak in the herd may fall prey. And then we have the authorities find him, but then they become all hush-hush regarding the circumstances of the body and what actually led to the death. And I think if people look in their areas, search state by state, everyone can search in their own state or own area, they're going to find a disturbing number of these cases where when a body is found, that no cause of death is ever released and that no further details are ever forthcoming, and that even family obituaries and such will be very vague as to the actual circumstances as to how someone died. Another case involved 37-year-old John Hill out of Oregon. In this case, and again, this was fairly recent, looking back just the last few years, this was September 2014. What's interesting is he'd gone hunting. He was a bow hunter. He had his supplies. He actually knew the area that he was hunting in, supposedly knew it well. And within a matter of hours of him being out, he placed a phone call saying that he didn't know where he was, that the ground seemed unfamiliar, and that he thought he was lost. It reminded me almost of the Flight 19 story. If you're in the Triangle lore, where there's the last call saying, everything looks strange, we're lost, I don't understand what's going on, that he placed a call like that saying he was disoriented, and then his phone went out. Now, they found him within a couple days. His body was only a mile from his truck. But what was interesting was, once again, we had the National Guard involved, including aviation units, within a very short time involved in the search. And we have that when they found him, even though it had only been days, it was stated in the press that there were issues with identification of the body because of damage to it. And then there was no follow-up in the press as to what might have caused the damage to his body or what might have happened to him within a matter of days as to render him unidentifiable without relying on dental records and the like. It was also odd that you have a fellow who's only a mile from his vehicle, and yet he's calling in saying he's lost, disoriented, and it's a fairly straight shot from where he was found to where he parked. So it raises some questions to what might have happened in this case.
It really does make you wonder what the last moments of these people's lives were like. I can't even imagine how horrible it must have been for them.
And you also have to wonder why, even though he had a cell phone, even though he was able to get one call out, why it suddenly and abruptly died. And if he had his cell phone, well, wouldn't he have had an app on it with GPS or map software or some ability to get back to his vehicle only a mile away? It just begins to raise questions that I don't think have been answered.
Oh, I agree. If his vehicle was only a mile away, you think his phone wouldn't have any problem with that. Let's talk about the Bernard Reitman case.
Bernard Reitman, I found, was right here in Wyoming. He was out of Cheyenne. This happened in September 2015. This is another case where we have an individual. He was somewhat older, at 85, but he was described as in good health. He was out solo hunting. He was hunting in an area that had drainage ditches. What was interesting in this case is we have an individual who was out solo hunting, following the elk herds. He was hunting in an area of fields that were marked by drainage ditches. So even though he was described as good health, it would have been somewhat difficult for him to go climbing in and out of steep drainage ditches. Yet they found his rifle discarded on one side of a field in the drainage ditch, almost as though it had been discarded in a hurry, and then they found no trail or anything leading across the field. But on the other side of the field, they found his body. And again, no cause of death was ever released, but it just seems strange that an 85-year-old man would quickly climb down one drainage ditch, for whatever reason, get rid of his hunting rifle, because rifles are obviously expensive and something that many people become emotionally attached to, run across the field or otherwise be taken across this field, and his body end up in a ditch on the other side. So he would have had to go down in one ditch, lose his rifle, climb up out of the ditch, run across the field, and climb into another ditch, or be taken in that ditch. And yet again, here we have someone who no cause of death was ever released to the press. Richard Harkins is another case where we have a hunter who goes missing. Very quickly, we have U.S. military involvement. In this case, it was U.S. Air Force parajumpers, not the National Guard, who were involved. And they're under the United States Special Operations Command. So they're the guys who go in behind enemy lines, rescue down pilots, and go on special missions, that sort of thing. We know that they were involved in the search. It was a total of a 4-day search, and this was in September of 2015. What's interesting in this case, we have signs that the individual, Rick Harking, may have been affected by infrasound, which is it's a frequency below 20 hertz that some people are more sensitive to than others. We know that some predators, such as tigers, release this in their roar or when they're hunting. And it's a low-frequency oscillation that travels through the skull and your bones, and it can cause ear ringing, dizziness, palpitation, imbalance, and mimic motion sickness. Other symptoms can be unease, sorrow, fear, chills down the spine, pressure in the chest. So when we hear about people describing things where they feel a literal chill, or they felt their blood run cold, or they just felt something was wrong in an area, it suggests perhaps we have a predator that's using infrasound. Now, Rick, they tried to say that he was suffering from altitude sickness, but that had different symptoms than he was experiencing, and he was only at 9,000 feet, an altitude he had been at before. So what happened is Rick got sick and agreed to stay at the hunting camp and was separated from his companions, and then it was almost as though he vanished from the camp because his friends came back that afternoon while the rest went out. He was texting them back and forth late afternoon, yet by the time they were retrieved that evening, he was gone without a trace. Linwood David Waters is another case where we have an individual who was somewhat older, but certainly in good health. He was only 61 years old. He was an experienced hunter. He knew the area he was going to hunt in. He goes out hunting alone one Monday and is reported missing. Now, again, in this case, we have a report that it was very specifically United States Air Force parajumpers who were involved in the search, and in this case they found him unresponsive at the scene, with no mention being made in the press as to what his injuries were or were not. They found him within a day of him being gone. So within a day we had the elite of the U.S. Air Force involved in what should have been just a normal missing hunter case, which suggests something a little strange. The parajumpers were actually the ones who pronounced him dead at the scene, and they said that he died of natural causes and then didn't release anything else. This is another one of those cases where it seems strange because of the rapid military involvement and specifically the involvement of elite U.S. Air Force retrieval and rescue units in the case within a very short period of time. Travis Anderson was a younger man. This was, again, recent. This was October of 2014. Travis was out hunting with his father. Travis became separated from his father, complaining that his feet were badly blistered and that he was going to try to make his way back to camp. Travis and his father were keeping in touch with two-way radios, and as late as that afternoon, he called his dad on the radio saying he was at or near a waterfall, and he was just going to sit down there, that he wasn't going to get up until his dad came and got him, and that his feet were too badly blistered to walk anymore. Now, again, in this case, we had, once he was declared missing, when his dad couldn't find him, we had National Guard helicopters, or at least military helicopters attributed to the National Guard, in the air that same day. They found signs of a fire had been lit in a hat about a mile away from the waterfall. And then as the helicopter moved into the nearest waterfall, they found Travis, and they found his body. Now, the official story was that he'd somehow fallen, and yet he said that he was unable to walk further. We'd seen that he'd made a campsite about a mile away from the waterfall, and elements of his hat, clothing, and other gear were there, and he had time to make a fire. Yet somehow he was discovered dead over a mile away after he said he couldn't walk another step. And we had the military being involved within a matter of hours yet again, without any effort being made to tell the family, oh, he'll probably walk out or give us a day and see or anything like that. It was almost immediate military involvement.
It sure does make you wonder what's going on with these cases where the government sends in military forces like that almost immediately to help look for the body. They normally don't do that, so it's almost as if they do know something's going on in these areas.
Yeah, it's almost as though there's certain units that are on call or that have this as part of their mission statement here in the continental United States to be prepared to go out on these strange cases. I'm not even sure what to call them. I've been terming them events. And this is another case where we have some indication that there was an unusual fog in the area, which I think is worth mentioning. It's the same kind of fog we can hear about in some reports of phenomena in the Bermuda Triangle, where people will say that their plane will fly into a fog, and then there'll be hours of time lost, or other strange things will happen. A lot of the commonalities to all this is these reports of a strange fog, which is also reported all the way back into ancient times regards to fairy lore and things regarding an underworld or a realm not of this earth. You would find them associated with clean fogs, mysterious mists, and things of that nature. And I think it might be an electromagnetic phenomenon, almost as though wherever these things come from, when they enter where we are, that a gate or portal has to open, or that these things themselves just either wander through it or cause it to be open, or maybe they have no control over it, but that there's some kind of electromagnetic disturbance that takes place in some of these cases where something from elsewhere comes here. And that's just supposition on my part. But yeah, it could also be something as simple as a predator prefers to use the fog to conceal itself. But the mentions of fog and mists has been so consistent. You'll also find it in David Polidi's books regarding missing persons. I just think it's something that should be looked at or examined more closely than it has been.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I wonder what's behind all that. Let's talk about the Robert Carter case.
Robert Carter disappeared in Montana. Yet again, we have a bow hunter. So we have an individual who either did not have a rifle, or if they had a firearm at all, had only a handgun. And I think that's important because it seems to me that more bow hunters disappear or are found mysteriously dead than rifle hunters. And then when the rifle hunters disappear or are found mysteriously dead, that they're more often to have been older gentlemen or people showing signs of a disability. Here there was an 8-day search, and it took him 8 days to find the body, yet he was found only a mile straight uphill from where he parked his truck. And this was at the Big Hole National Battlefield area where they found him. It was stated that the cause of death was not obvious, and that was all that they said. Nothing further was ever revealed. His family described him as an avid outdoorsman, well-trained in survival. He was hunting alone, and to get back to his truck, all he would have had to do was walk straight downhill. Just follow it downhill, he would come to his truck and be able to walk out. So it's almost as though perhaps the body wasn't there the whole time, or it brings to mind a lot of David Polidi's cases. And we've also found a lot of cases of reports of dogmen around cemeteries or where battles had taken place or military installations. So this one is another one that stuck out in my head. It seemed a little strange, to put it mildly.
Another strange phenomenon involves cases around Alberta, Canada. There's a cluster that you mentioned in the pre-interview I'd like to talk about now. The first missing hunter I'd like for you to talk about is Rick Cross.
There seems to have been a whole cluster of weirdness in Alberta, Canada in 2014. There was a hunter, Rick Cross, 54 years old. He was a rifle hunter, not a bow hunter. He was out during a sheep hunting trip. Now, he was found with his rifle laying discarded near his corpse, and the reports in the Canadian press said that they found trauma consistent with a bear attack. In other words, his body was very badly mutilated, torn limb from limb, basically, and partially devoured. The acting theory was that some large predator, it was never revealed why they claimed it was a bear other than the convenience factor of, well, what could have killed him? Well, it must have been a bear. But it seemed as though he'd shot a sheep, he'd set his rifle down and was going to examine his kill or retrieve it or gut it or otherwise handle it. And that while he was thus occupied, whatever got him wanted his kill, had apparently been following the sheep and then took him and killed him. Now, in the same area of Alberta, Canada, around the same time, a guy named Ralph Greenaway. He was 40 years old, a hiker, an avid outdoorsman. He was a veteran of the British Parachute Regiment, a well-known base jumper, well-known in adventure sports. He also went missing around the same time, hiking in this area, and he's vanished with other trace. To this day, he still has not been found. But while they were searching for Ralph Greenaway as part of the general search, which did coincidentally involve elements of the Canadian military, they found another body that had apparently has remained strewn around, but that the skull was intact enough that they could establish the identity by dental records. And they discovered this was a 21-year-old Michael Morissette. And what's interesting is that Michael was missing out of Montreal in Canada, not Alberta, wasn't known to have been going hunting or anything, and as far as anyone could establish, he vanished out of the city and yet they found his remains here in the wilderness, in the same area where we're searching for a missing hiker, and had someone torn apart near their kill under strange circumstances. Mark Steed I read about this one in the Seattle Times. This was in November of 2015. He was a bow hunter. He was, again, hunting alone. He was by his friends and family, a no survivalist and outdoorsman, and he was a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. He went out on a one-day hunt. His vehicle was found one day, and the next day they found his body exactly 2.5 miles from his truck. Now, he was a big guy, 6 foot 180, in excellent condition, not known to have any health problems. The only thing released about the cause of death was that he had, quote, unquote, fallen. And what's interesting in this case is we know he had his cell phone with him, but there were no calls for help, and there was no formal funeral ever held. It was almost as though the body was not released back to the family, and everyone wanted to just sort of be vague as to what happened in this case, kind of keep the details out of the press. And I found this to be another interesting case, as he was a relatively short distance from his truck. He knew the area. There's nothing obvious that should have killed him, and yet we were told that he, quote-unquote, fell.
How about the Melvin Nadell case?
I believe Melvin Nadell's case is strange enough that David Polides covered in his books as well. And this fits the profile that's emerging. We have a man who was an experienced outdoorsman. He was a bow hunter. Melvin was actually a first-degree Taekwondo expert, and we know that he had a .44 special revolver that he habitually carried with him on his person as well when he went on a hunting trip with friends. Now, he separated from his friends. They went one way. He stayed back a little ways with the truck and then apparently wandered off on his own, like as though maybe he'd seen an animal or something was going after it. This is one of those cases that David Polides mentioned where dogs were able to follow a scent trail only part way. After about 50 yards down the trail, the dogs lost Melvin's scent trail and couldn't establish it. To this day, he's never been found. What I found interesting in this case was that he was a relatively small man. He was 5'2" and 135, and the reason he separated from his friends was he was having some knee problems because he had a wrapped knee. So he actually physically couldn't have wandered off very far without being in pain or disconveniencing himself. But that the same wrapped knee, I thought, might have marked him to an intelligent predator as displaying a weakness that was worth exploiting. And I think that might be the reason that Melvin didn't come back from that hunt, as well as the fact that he went off alone, whereas his friends did.
Because of that wrapped knee, I sure wonder how hindered he was.
I think that the infrasound might be an issue in terms of we might have a predator that's able to confuse its target, and that this might be reason some of these people report being lost when they do get a phone call out, but that would be speculation on my part. What I would think was that we had something that was smart enough to watch and try and pick the weakest of the group, wait for him to be separated, and pick its time to strike, and then do so suddenly enough that either he wasn't able to get a shot off or that his weapon was ineffective against whatever got it.
If whatever it was, Dogman or something else, was able to take someone like that out, it really makes you wonder what their limits are.
It does. I think we're dealing with something at least as strong, in the case of some of these attacks, at least as strong and capable as an African lion, which would, of course, be something that people here in North America aren't going out equipped to deal with and aren't expecting. And that with a combination of unexpected attack and its own skill set at being a predator, that is why, rather than any supernatural ability, that it's able to take and prevail over even armed humans in some of these cases.
As I listen to you share these cases with us, Christopher, am I to believe that you think most of these might have been caused by dogmen, or is that something that you haven't declared yet?
I would say that there's definitely an unknown predator involved in these cases. I believe it would be more likely to be Dogman. We basically have two cryptids described in North America that would fit the profile of something that could do this. One would be Bigfoot, which some people believe in, some don't. But I think as North American cryptids go, that Bigfoot's relatively respectable. And I could see that perhaps being the issue in a few of these cases where, like the sheep hunter, where he was found torn apart near his kill, where perhaps the territorial Bigfoot may have been responsible in terms of taking out the hunter because he got in the way of, basically got between a Sasquatch and his knees. But usually we have in human encounters with Bigfoot, they tend to be more reticent in avoiding humans, whereas we know that Dogman, from various sightings, seems to be stalking humans actively and quite likely preying on humans. So that's why I think Dogman would be a better culprit in some of these cases than anything else. It's also showing a degree of intelligence that would be very unusual, that's at least equal to what a human being would have in terms of being able to identify targets, plan ambushes, and isolate victims.
When you look at their size, speed, strength, and weaponry, it goes without saying that if they chose to do so, it wouldn't be a problem at all to take out even the most formidable human, even with a handgun in most cases, so you just might be onto something there. Let's move on and talk about the Walter Benskin case.
Walter Benskin went missing and his body was later found in October of 2006. Here's another case where the remains were found, but no details were released about it. But what we do know that was interesting in his case was that he was following an elk he had shot. So again, we have an individual who vanishes and then turns up dead, getting in between prey, a large mammal that he shot, and apparently some greater predator that decided to prey on him. And I think what's happening in these cases is individuals will lay their bow or their rifle down, and especially when they're hunting alone, they're not watching the area for anything sneaking up on them. And as they go to process their kill, I believe that's when they're falling victim to whatever is responsible. See, I believe that what's doing this, I don't believe it to be invulnerable. I don't believe it to be supernatural. I think that the very fact it does plan to attack people when they're vulnerable or when they don't have their rifle ready would suggest that it does that because it has to, that it would in fact be vulnerable if someone were watching for it or had someone on overwatch or otherwise were in fact prepared. I think the predator does what it does for a reason, and that reason is its own survival, that it's a defense mechanism. I don't think that they're invulnerable to the efforts of humans or that you need silver bullets or anything like that. I think you just need to be aware and not be caught unawares. Basically have situational awareness, keep your head on a swivel kind of thing, and to have enough guns, basically, because in the cases where we have people who we know to have been armed, you're not hearing of anyone who's really vanishing who's armed with dangerous game rifles or usually large caliber Magnum handguns of the type you use on bears, things that might have presented a risk for these creatures. So even if they had gotten a shot or two off, it could very well not have stopped whatever took them.
I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there's a good chance that whether it's a Dogman or Sasquatch that's responsible for these cases, there's a good chance that whatever killed these people wasn't working alone. If they weren't working alone, even if the person was heavily armed, that really makes it a lot easier for whatever it was to take out that person.
Yes, it does, and that adds a whole other dimension to their intelligence as to whether or not they're capable of using tactics and planned ambushes of that nature. That might explain why in some of these cases there seems to have been almost a military response in terms of what was being done to handle the situation.
What's worse than dealing with one Dogman? 2, 3, 4, or 5?
Yes, the pack mentality becomes a question of what might be involved in terms of what these people would be up against.
Please tell us about the Jerome Childress case.
Jeremy Childress was 31 years old. He's another individual who went missing in Oregon. This is in the very large Oregon Tillamook State Forest. And he was out hunting with his best friend and his best friend's son. A very heavy fog descended on the area. So they separated when his friend's son became frightened. Now, Jeremy, who was very experienced outdoorsman, he had his rifle, he had his pocket knife, he had his pack of cigarettes. He was sure that he would be able to find the way back to camp, even in this thick fog. So while his friend and the friend's son basically stopped for a little while, Jeremy headed off to pass by. Now, once the fog cleared, his friend and the friend's son made it back to the agreed-upon rendezvous point. But Jeremy, he never made it. And to this day, he still has never been found. He essentially walked into this fog and disappeared. He had his rifle with him, but no rifle shots were ever heard fired. Nobody found a trail of cigarette butts. He certainly had his lighter, yet he never made a fire. It was almost as though he walked into nothing. or as though something in the fog took him. And that was another case with a strange fog, and then someone vanishes into it. Almost like it's the Bermuda Triangle, but here on land and here in the Oregon State Forest.
Yeah, with as benign as Oregon is, you wouldn't think that things like that would happen there, but as time goes by, I'm finding out more and more things like that have happened there.
Yes, there's been quite a few missing hunter cases I've found that are in Oregon or other settled areas. You wouldn't expect Vermont to be a hotbed of danger either, and yet you have individuals going into the field and either dying suddenly or disappearing.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising to me. Let's talk about the Don Allen Peters case.
Don Allen Peters was another case that happened up in Alberta. It was a few years before the Alberta cluster we talked about previously. This happened in November 2007. He was found only 200 meters from where he parked his truck. He's a bow hunter, and due to Canadian firearms laws, he probably didn't have a handgun with him. Again, he was found with his remains eaten by a large predator, torn apart and partially devoured. Now, the story released to the press was that it was probably a bear that had torn him apart. However, a bear researcher pointed out to the media that this seemed odd, as he had been researching the bears in that area during this time and had found that all the bears would be hibernating. There was also reports in this area that there may have been wolves, which is our possible Dogman connection, as there have been sightings of what were reported to be large gray wolves and prints and such found in the area. I think this is another case where someone got what they were hunting, but then something was hunting them and waited till they were distracted, and the hunter became the hunted.
Because of their size and weaponry, I wouldn't be surprised at all if dogmen killed their victims in a very similar way to how bears kill theirs. When you look at the long claws, the powerful jaws, and their size, I'll bet you they're very similar.
Yes, I think that the type of dogman that individuals often refer to as a werewolf, that kind of looks like something out of the underworld of Van Helsing movies, I think with the reach it's got, the claws, and the dexterity of its fingers, it's definitely capable of ripping a man apart. And it's going to have some reach to it with its claws. Its mouth is definitely not the only thing you need to worry about.
Yeah, I can't think of any other way that would be worse to go out than that. Is there anything you can think of, Christopher, that these people could have done to avoid being killed the way they were, besides just deciding not to go out into the wilderness in the first place?
A lot of times people write and ask me if all this means they should not go in the woods, not go camping, not go hunting, etc. And no, I don't think that's the case. While these things do happen, I don't think that they happen all that often. Otherwise, they'd be even better known than what they are. I think that one of the most important things is when you want to go outdoors, be it hunting, hiking, fishing, camping, whatever, is not go alone. It seems like when bad things happen to individuals who were first in line, who get separated, or who are last in line, I think that a lot of the ways that people could enjoy the outdoors is just make it a group activity. Bring a friend, bring several people, and just be aware of your surroundings. And I think it's a good idea to just recognize that there are still predators present in the woods of North America. I believe that there's a relatively unknown dangerous predator preying on humans, but even if you don't want to accept that, there are still known animals and known hazards such as bears, mountain lions, and particularly other humans. So it'd be a good idea to just maintain awareness of your situation and your surroundings. And if you're experienced enough to do so, and it's legal where you are, to consider being armed when out and about.
Oh, I think that's really good advice. What would you have to say, though, to the people who responded after listening to your first two shows by saying it's one heck of a leap for you to jump to the idea that it is dogmen that are out there killing these people?
Ironically enough, I actually used to, when I first read David Paulides' books, I actually used to email him and try and pick apart some of his cases, saying, well, in this case, don't you think it could have been this, that, or the other with natural explanation? And to this day, I'm sure that some of the cases covered in his books were there that did have other explanations, but I think he eventually got tired of dealing with me and stopped emailing me back. He just basically said, look at the pattern and look for the patterns that begin to emerge in these cases. And I would say the same thing is happening here, that we have unusual fogs, we have military involvement, we have people being taken unawares, we have people being taken when they're alone, and that we have a large number of cases of dog attacks, as we mentioned in the last two episodes, that might not be conventional dog attacks, that just seem to have certain elements of the strange about them, including cases where it seemed as though there'd been missing animals or domestic animals preyed upon and an unknown predator had been present in the area. So I would urge people to certainly do their own research and try to look for themselves to what cases they can find and start to look for things that fit this pattern. And once you see the pattern, that's when it becomes a lot less belief and you realize something very strange has been going on.
I couldn't agree more. The more you look into this phenomenon, the more it becomes clear that something out of the ordinary is definitely going on here. Christopher, I know after the first two shows we did, you've been contacted by people who are asking you how they could tell if one of these things might be in their area. What would you say to that?
Well, I certainly invite any listeners who are interested or have questions to go ahead and drop me an email. I answer all my emails, and that's at dogmanevents@gmail.com. I try to keep it easy and simple to remember. But in terms of those who worry about these in their areas, I think dogman sightings in general are vastly underreported. I think that while people are willing increasingly to come forward, thanks to all the media attention it's gotten, and report things like, I think I saw Bigfoot, that people are still not willing to come out and say, oh, I think I saw a werewolf. So things I'd be on the lookout for if someone wonders if something strange is going on would be, have there been any police warnings or warnings from the DNR or Natural Resources or Game Commissioner or whatever their state agencies are about staying out of an area because of predators, warnings about escaped animals, unusual livestock deaths, unusual disappearances of pets, unusual cases of missing hikers, pretty much the usual trappings as to what might be the beginning of a horror movie, might be also a warning in real life that, hey, maybe there's something in this area. And also to look for areas like roads or land being blocked off with an unusual sudden military or police presence may also be an indicator of strange things lurking in the woods.
Those are all good indicators. There's another case that we didn't go over I'd like for you to touch on now involving one Douglas Moore out of Texas.
Yes, Douglas Moore, I actually don't have the date written down in my notes, and I apologize to your listeners for that. But what happened in this case is Douglas Moore was found in Cherokee County, Texas. He was found with a single large puncture wound in his thigh. There was an area of deer blood in front of him, so it looked as though he was basically stooped over his kill or otherwise processing a deer he killed. His rifle was found unloaded nearby with no casings in it. So it seemed as though he was doing this one standard hunter's safety practice of unloading your weapon before you try and process your kill. And then whatever wanted his kill, in this case his deer, was able to take him and somehow concentrated on a single area of anatomy, killed him with a single puncture to his thigh, and then stole his kill. So it's another one of those cases where a hunter meets an unfortunate end in the woods that's gone out hunting alone, and the totality of the circumstances just suggests a certain underlying strangeness.
So it appeared that something had wounded his femoral artery, causing him to bleed out then.
Yes, whatever did it was very focused in its attack. He had a single puncture wound, almost as though it either had an idea of human anatomy or knew a weak point to strike.
Wow, that is really strange. I wonder how he met his end. I wonder what it was. It kind of sounds like it might have been a chupacabra, but if blood was found at the scene of the crime, then it wouldn't make sense that that's what it would be. Did they definitely mention whether they did or did not find blood?
His blood was at the scene as though he'd bled out rather than that the blood had been removed. So it seemed more like a targeted attack by something that wanted his prey, because the deer carcass was then gone. So it seemed like something wanted that deer or may have already been tracking it, and he got in the way.